Okay, so I guess we're ready to start. Hello, everybody. We want to thank you all for coming today. We're really excited to have you, and we hope you get a lot out of this session. Today, we will discuss techniques for breaking down and prioritizing your work on product backlog to maximize value and learning. Our speaker is Tommy Norman, Chief Agility Officer at Acklen Avenue. And Tommy, I think we can get started.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tatiana, and thanks everybody who are joining us today. Also, we are recording this, so this recording will be up on our YouTube channel probably in a week or so. And so if you ever want to come back to it, you can. So as we said today, topic is getting the best ROI out of your product backlog. I'm going to be covering just a handful of a couple of techniques I think are very important. I'm leaving plenty of time for questions at the end, but if you have questions during it, absolutely. If you can either put them in the chat and Tatiana will let me know when there's something in chat, or you can raise your hand and ask it in person, whatever is best for you. But I will go ahead and get started. So just real quick about me, as we said, I am the Chief Agility Officer here at Acklen Avenue. My job is I helped build out our delivery offerings. We do custom software development. So if you need agile teams to come in and build software, or individual contributors through StaffAug or some mix of those things, we help people build agile software. I also run the Agile Nashville user group. I don't know how many people are located near us. Since we're virtual now, anybody could be from anywhere. But if you are in Nashville, if you go to agilenashville.com, you can sign up for that. And we have regular monthly meetings. We didn't have one this month just because I was traveling so much. So I wasn't able to do it this month. I also run Music City Agile, which is part of the Music City Tech Conference Series. It's a conference that has three at the same time: Music City Code, Music City Data, and Music City Agile. And I help run the Music City Agile part. We haven't come back completely from the pandemic yet, but we will be back next year. So again, if you're near the area, that is a great conference to come to. It's good 3 days. And like I said, because it has code, data, and agile, there is something pretty much for your entire team. And we have, national speakers that have written the books that are probably on your shelf, local speakers and things like that. You may even submit. And then lastly, I also do a lot of work with O'Reilly Online Learning, used to be called Safari Books Online. And I have a bunch of videos on there. I do some online live training with them as well. I just did 2 videos for them. I was in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago. One on metrics, I think it's about 3 hours worth of a deep dive into agile metrics. I'm going to be doing some on release planning, some other stuff. So if you have a lot of big companies will have membership to this, and you can get on there for free and you can look at all of that content as well. So enough about me. Let's get into it. So I want to talk about mainly 3 factors for product backlog return on investment that I think are critical to this. The first one is how you break down your work and put it on your backlog. So the way we break down our work is very, very critical. And I think actually one of the more critical things, we're going to do later on another whole thing just on story slicing and breaking down work. I'm going to touch on some of those things today, but I think it's one of the first things is how I break down the work and populate the backlog. Then how I actually prioritize that backlog. And we'll talk about some different techniques and the various, good and bad things about some of those. And then I'll show you some of my favorites to do. And then also, as you go along and are delivering, how are you refining your backlog? How are you getting more details? When are you getting more details? How do you know when's the right time to get detail and when's not the right time to get detail? And I'll go into a little bit about that. For all those 3 things is what we're going to cover today. So let's start with breaking down work. So how we break down work matters. People come in with some big idea. We break that down into smaller ideas, and even those ideas are into smaller ideas. If we are working in an agile way, we know we want to work in little small things. If you're, a Scrum shop, you're trying to break things down small enough to fit in a time box sprint. If you are a Kanban shop, we're a big Kanban shop. So we are always trying to get things down to a small, sometimes a standardized level of work. So we're always breaking things down smaller and smaller into hopefully what is independently valuable features that at the end we release those, and those provide some value. But breaking things down that way is not as easy as it sounds. What happens is when you take a big idea and you break it down, if you still kind of break it down in chunks and try to deliver it in chunks, then you're still batching things together. And we know from lean and all the teachings there, big batches are bad because when you deliver in big batches, if there's a problem, you kind of have the whole batch now has a problem. There's lots of things that go along with that. So we don't want to, even though we can break down work, you may still be breaking it down in a way that makes big batches. So the way I kind of describe this is a lot of times the reason this happens is when you're looking at a big idea, like from an architecture standpoint, from an engineering standpoint. Typically in the past, the way we would look at a big idea is breaking it down like, oh, I need to build a user interface. I need to build a business layer. I need to build a database. We look at it in the technical layers. You sometimes call this the cake layer architecture. And we would look at things in the technical layers. And then you'd have a business analyst or product owner or product management, and they look at it in functional areas. So here's all the things that security has to do. Here's all the things that catalog has to do. Here's all the things that payment has to do. And we kind of come up with these chunks of functionality. But the thing is when you break this thing down, these chunks aren't valuable by themselves independently. So if I built all of the UI for security, I can't make any money off of that. It's not valuable by itself. If I delivered that and said, here's, it doesn't do anything. The backups, the back end is not connected. There's no database. It's just UI. Doesn't provide any value. Even if I build all of security. So I've built all of security. I built all the UI. I built all the back end. The database is good to go. You can log in. You can change your password. It still doesn't bring any value because that's not what this product is supposed to do. It's just the plumbing of what it needs to do. It's kind of table stakes. It has to have some kind of authentication. As you can see here, since we have catalog and payment, this is probably like an e-commerce site. Well, until I can find something and pay for it, you haven't solved my problem. Even if we build all of the UI for everything, we have completed all the UI for all of them, I still don't have any value. It's not until I do all of these, then do I actually have something of value. And when I say value, I mean money, or cost savings, whatever it is. At the end of this, I build something that somebody's going to pay me money for, or we're going to implement internally, and it's going to save me a bunch of money. And so, this is where I can still break work down, but it could still be in a big batch, because until all of it's delivered, it doesn't add the value that the end user or end customer needs. So a way I try to avoid doing this is by getting to the why and the who. Before I talk about the what and the how, I want to talk about the why and the who. And I do this using personas and goals. It's one of my techniques for doing this. And so when you do that, you kind of put your customer or your persona on one side. You put what goal is that person trying to get to, and on the other side. So, we're not talking about, on catalog, this, remember we used to have the system shall show you the catalog details, I don't want to hear that. I want to hear, all right, here is Joe, and Joe is trying to buy whatever we're selling. He needs to find this. He needs to be able to pay for it. And, he typically uses credit cards. So he needs to pay with a credit card and get out. So that is get Joe through all of this with as thin as much as I can get away with, of implementing just enough to get him to his goal. And that would be a small slice of value. And that could be a story. It might be an epic, and there might be stories underneath it. But I'm trying to think of accomplish a goal. If this becomes a card on our Kanban board or our product backlog, whatever it is, when this card is done, I have solved some problem. And using personas, very specific personas, not just roles. Customer is a role, or user is a role. Even account holder is a role. A persona is, this is Martha, and she is a mom, and she's taking her kids from the baseball game that they just won to a pizza party, and she needs to pay cash for it because they only take cash, and she doesn't have any cash. Okay, she needs to get $60 out of her checking account on a Saturday. Solve that problem. And we solve that as thinly as possible. And this is what I call slices of value. A lot of times we talk about splitting stories and things like that. To me, this is slicing, because it's all the way through everything, not only through the cake layers of I have a front end, a back end, and a database and that kind of stuff, but even through all of that, it's as thin a slice as I could possibly get. And so what that means is I deliver things in little small valuable batches. And if I deliver things in small valuable batches, it is a smaller investment, getting back to ROI. So if you think about it, I invest a little bit of money, and the whole idea is once I've solved this problem, it makes me more money. If I put in $1, I should get $2, or more out, something that return should be worth it. And when I do little small ones, The great thing about doing small ones also is sometimes we're not right. Sometimes we put it out there and the client doesn't care or doesn't have the cost savings we thought it was. But then what we get is learning. And learning has a certain amount of currency. I can't pay payroll with it, but I can, take that information, put it back into my ideas and make my next investment a smarter investment and keep this cycle going. And the smaller I make these, then each one is a little smaller investment. I am, de-risking, things and making those feedback loops a lot faster. So breaking down work, and probably all of you are like, okay, this is, we know breaking down work is something we should be doing. So let me show you what that looks like. Let me stop sharing and going to share again. So let me share this. Tatiana, are you seeing my product vision board now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I'll zoom out real quick. This is an example of what we use when we onboard clients here at Acklen. And they're very customized for each client, but they kind of start with these basic ideas in here. And the place we always start is with a product vision. This template is from a guy named Roman Pilcher. He has a couple of really good templates. The persona one I'm about to show you is his as well. I think they're nice and simple and easy to kind of get your heads around. So the first thing we start with every client is this product vision. What does your product do? What is the vision? Tell me in a sentence or two, what is it supposed to do? Why are you creating it? Then who is it for? Your target groups. What needs or problems of theirs are you trying to solve? How is your product actually going to do that? And then the business goals. How is it going to actually change your business? How is it going to actually help you make money or do whatever it is? And this is a really great thing to do. And I do it with the whole team. So I bring all of my team, engineers, QA, DevOps, everybody. They should understand this. I think understanding the why is very good for us. And then I have them bring all of their team, bring your business stakeholders, bring your engineering stakeholders, because it's interesting because sometimes they don't say the same thing. That to me shows me something interesting too. When the tech guy says, I think this is our goal. And the business people say, well, no, I think this is. We need to get them aligned. So getting that kind of alignment and also this understanding before I even talk about a screen or a database or an algorithm, why are we building this? And then from this target group, so like this example I use is an ATM example. Let's pretend ATMs didn't exist and we're building the automatic teller machine. And so, our overall goal is allow our account holders to perform common bank transactions anytime without coming into the bank. That's the goal of this product. Who are some of the target groups we're going to? People with, personal checking account holders and savings account holders, small to medium businesses who want to do frequent transactions with do frequent transactions inside the bank. Internal ones, like we might have a whole new role now that we're building ATMs. We have to have technicians who do support for this, bank admins who manage accounts and things like that. So these are the different people that it's targeted for and maybe using the system. And then we also break down some of their needs. Well, I take this, let me scroll over, and I know I'm going to this a high level, but it's because we're going over a lot of different stuff. And as I said, we have an upcoming webinar where I'll go into this a little bit more detail. But we'll take some of those and break them down. So I won't go into all these, but I'll just kind of hit the high points. So like, here's one, Martha, and she's a personal checking account. She's a mom of two, 5 and 8. She's 44 years old, lives in the suburbs, 5 miles away from the Locust branch, has a joint checking account, typically has $20 or less on her. Checking account has an average monthly of this. These are demographics that might affect the behavior and the wants and needs of this specific persona. What is this, this person's goals? Often needs cash on the weekends for kids' activities. Local branches out of the way, not always convenient to reach during the day. Often has the kids with her and doesn't want to take them into the bank. Does not love a lot of cash on hand. Doesn't like to have cash on hand. Makes her nervous to have that on there. So, Martha has certain needs. We go over here to Charles, and Charles is a college student. He's a personal checking account holder too. So they're same role, but he has different needs. Some of them overlap, some of them don't. Does not like carrying large amounts of cash due to a previous bad experience. His parents has a bank account, only has 2 branches in the college town he's in. He needs cash at last minute for after hours activities, going to the bar, doing whatever he's doing. So similar things, but they might use it differently. Then you get into something like over here, we have Alice. And Alice is a small business owner. Has the different demographics, but also that, has to move money between two accounts to cover costs. So probably has a savings account and moves money from there into the checking account to cover expenses, to cover payroll or whatever that is. Has a very specific thing on Sundays, does a large amount of cash on hand at a pop-up bake sale, and then once, cannot deposit that in cash until Monday, and maybe wants to be able to deposit that cash on the weekend and not carry it around with them. And then maybe we have, Terry is the CFO of a mid-sized business, which has a whole bunch of different needs. But the important part is we're kind of, we're making this real and personal to us, and we're trying to solve somebody's problems. And then when you start kind of mapping this out, we zoom down here into story mapping. So you may have seen story mapping before. This is something Jeff Patton kind of popularized, and there's a lot of tools out there to do it. But when I see them, they still break things down into chunks. And so my thing is always, you're breaking things down into goals for a persona or a particular user type. So I would like to start my story mapping with the overall product vision statement at the top. Why are we doing this in general? Everything should serve that. And then we'll take our, our roles or personas and put them up here. And then we'll start breaking down the things that they want into, larger things that they need, and then breaking those down. And you can also see that I have some, what might be sticky notes if you're doing this in live, but we just use these little circles. This 1, 2, and 3 is prioritization, which if you could, so I'll constantly be asking my stakeholders, all right, I know you have these 3 different types of roles. If you could only solve one problem for one of them in our first release, which one would it be? I am forcing them to make prioritization as far as user base, market base, and what goals. And so when they break down the goals, which one of these goals? Every time we kind of do an iteration, I like to do some type of prioritization. Now, usually what happens is they'll immediately be able to say like a couple of things. Oh, it has to be this, has to be this. And then you'll start getting into ones where they're like, they're debating. Once you've got a couple of them, that's good. Start there. You don't have to have everything. I like the stack rank, but if once you get past 2 or 3, 4, and people are kind of stumbling over themselves, taking a while to think of it, you've gotten the first couple of ones that were obvious. Start there. And then break those down. So like you have the personal checking account holder. They want to withdraw cash anytime. Okay, but they, sometimes that can mean, now I'm jacking everything up. They want to withdraw cash from checking. They want to withdraw cash from savings. Maybe they want to get an advance on a credit card. That's actually over here somewhere for more of the business owner. But that could be, they could have shared ones as well. And then you kind of see here, we're prioritizing by putting them in different lanes. Top ones are more important, ones are lower. This gets to start look like what you might see in a release planning in a story map. You also see these red markers, which is maybe we do some basic sizing, small, medium, and large, and it's very big buckets right now because we're still at early phases of it. So this is one way that I can already start kind of getting an idea of value and ROI, because I'm getting value by the stack ranking. And then some of the, you can't just have value, you have to have what is the actual investment. You put those together and you get the ROI. And this is one good way to do it, but I'm going to show you some other ways to do it in just a second. But this is, again, very much focused on users, personas, and what goal they're trying to get. You notice I haven't talked about screens yet or anything like that. We're going to get to that in a second when we talk about grooming, but I wanted to start here. So before I jump into slides again, questions, comments, concerns, you don't have to hold them to the end if you have them now. Do we have any in chat? Oh, looks like Taylor's got one.
I do actually. So when going through these story mapping, I see that you have them numbered like 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3 through 7. What exactly are you doing there? Are they like going through the different phases that would all like affect each user, or how is that kind of flowing?
So once you can kind of, you're seeing the Julia Child already baked one. So what this would normally start off is I would say, all right, here's our vision. Tell me, we'd put all our users on here, and then I would say, pick one. If I could only please one, which would it be? And we'll put the one on there. And I say, what's the next one? And they'll say, well, okay, small business owner. And what's the next one? This one. And say, all right, so now let's go to personal checking account. What are the things they want to do? And they would give me these 3 here. And then I would say, all right, if I could only solve one of those problems for the person checkout, which one it would be? Oh, well, that has to be withdraw cash anytime. That's number 1. So these are stack ranking as far as what do you perceive as the most valuable to that person. But I do it across here. So you can see like 1 and 2 are the most valuable for this one. But then we said, okay, but this one is not as important. This is actually more important than that one. So it's also, I want to make sure we don't just focus on just one persona the whole time. Because again, the highest priority for the small business owner might be, higher priority than one of the lower priorities for somebody else. But it starts kind of showing that. So it's just a stack ranking each time. And people will get caught up on it and they'll start arguing about it. And this is not the last time you're going to do it. You're going to do this over and over again. So don't let people get too stuck up. That's why I said, once you get like one or two, like the first two or three are easy. Like, oh my gosh, it's got to be this. Okay. Well, then break that one down. When you get to the fourth and fifth one and people are arguing about it, don't worry about it. So you may not even see 6 and 7 on here. I may not care because once I've got the first ones, because I'm never trying to get everything. I'm usually doing this in iterations. All right, let's take this big idea and let's slice off a couple of things and talk about those and then groom those and get those on the backlog. And then let's come back and slice off a couple of other ideas and put them on the backlog. So this is a very iterative function. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So then what you're going through is like, you're just slicing more and more, kind of refining each as you go down.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. And that's why there's no numbers on these is this is now saying, all right, this is, if this was more important, I would swap these.
Got it.
So that's why there's not numbers on those.
Thank you.
Okay. Absolutely. All right. Let me move back to the slides. Okay. You see my slides, Tatiana?
Yes.
Perfecto. All right. Let's talk a little bit about prioritization. I just touched on it. But let's just admit one thing is that most prioritization methods suck. We are bad at it. It's like estimating all, there's two types of estimates, lucky and lousy. We're really bad at it. Trying to look at an individual feature or an individual piece of the puzzle and saying, this is going to make us this amount of money. I mean, people say it all the time, but how accurate is it? And I've seen all sorts of different evaluation methods and they're all, some of them are better than others. Some of them have the appearance of being more specific and more accurate. That's dangerous because you don't really know. The only way to really know how valuable something is to deliver it and the customer will tell you. That is the only way to truly get the knowledge of whether something was valuable or not. So there's this link down here and I'm just going to hop over real quick and just show you this link real quick and you'll get these slides. We'll send you these slides as well. Let me jump to there. So I thought this was a really great article. It skims kind of the top of about 7 different prioritization methods. And I'm going to go into in depth in one of them that I use the most often. And I'm going to, speak to a couple other ones, but it has a couple in here that are just really good ideas of different ways of approaching. And to be honest, there's probably good ideas in all of them. And different times I might use one over the other. And so I think this is a great article. There'll be a link in there to, if you want to go in a little bit more in depth. The one that I want to talk about, go back to my slides. Before we get into that, so when we're talking about ROI, we talk about value is one thing, the value of this card. And I just said something about the customer, but I also want to make sure, remember that the customer and the user, not always the same person. Like if I get an app on my phone, I bought it, I paid with it my money, and now I am the user. But if we're talking about something like I used to work at LeanKit, and if you know LeanKit, that is a online, agile Kanban management system. And so there are, big companies, Walmart use that. Well, the person who bought it and paid for it at Walmart is probably not the person who uses it. So two very different people. So the value to a customer can be different than the value to a user. There's also just the market. Sometimes, the user and the customer may not know what they want to know. You're trying to get ahead of that. You're trying to say, this is something you didn't even know you wanted yet. And so there's a lot of market value. Is this valuable in the market because it's new? Then there's also competitors, ticking time bombs of somebody else is building this thing. And if we don't build it, we're going to get leapfrogged. So sometimes you're investigating, it's valuable, not necessarily because customers or users want it, but because somebody's going to beat us to the punch. All of these factors can be coming into value. And it is a tricky thing because some of this is based on user feedback. And we also have to be careful that sometimes the user says, yeah, I want that. And then you deliver it and they go, I'm not going to pay for it. Again, that's the gamble. market analysis, competitor analysis, you have to be careful because I've been at companies where we were pursuing competitors and we finally said, listen, why are we constantly playing catch up? Let's get ahead of it. Let's look at market analysis and we want to be the people that you have to catch up to. All of this stuff is going on, and product owners, are probably trying to get this from multiple places. They are the ultimate decider, hopefully, that will take all this information and decide, all right, I think this is the most valuable thing, or this is the most valuable thing. But if we're talking ROI, I also have to understand cost. What is it going to look like to implement this? What is the lift to do that? And so we have to have both of those things. And we just talked about prioritization methods suck. We also know estimation sucks. But again, at this early of a phase, when we're doing kind of early product ideation and populating a backlog, it just needs to be relative to each thing. This thing is twice as big as this thing. This thing is 3 times as big as this thing. So you can kind of get a general idea. And also, why do we, remember we talked about breaking things down? Why do we break things down? Because if I am going to estimate things, if I am going to evaluate things, smaller things are easy to estimate and evaluate. Duh, but it is sometimes we forget. And to this point, like I've gone in so many places where they've said, we're having problems estimating. And what are you going to do about it? I'm like, I'm not actually going to do anything about estimating. I'm going to do something about your story slicing, because the reason estimating is so bad is because your stories are either too big or they're a little ambiguous. They don't really solve a problem and they have too much inside them. The guts of them, don't make a lot of sense. And so how you break down work is actually what I would work on before I get into estimating and valuation techniques. So I think all of those things, it dovetails into each other. So let me show you the two things that I already kind of showed you. The first one, which is that easy kind of stack ranking. But let me show you another one. So another thing I like is something called a weighted shortest job first. And there's a couple of different ways to do this. I like to do it in a very simplified way. Again, since we know that the easiest way to do this is actually deliver something, get something back. I try to do as little as I can. I try to be, I want to be deliberate, and I do want to do some analysis, but I don't want to do a whole bunch and get an analysis paralysis, or do a whole bunch of analysis and think I know more than I do, and spend more time building something and then only to find out the customer doesn't want it. So I try to keep these as lightweight and as high impact as possible. So what I'll do is I'll take a client in, and this is, when I say client, this is the business people, but the technical people as well. And so you can see here, at this point in time, I'm doing all the, what you might call an epic, or these large goals here. So remember when they were stack ranking them here, if they were having problems doing this, I might do this exercise where I would just give them this and say, all right, we've got this matrix, low value to high value on this axis, and then high effort to low effort on this axis. So first off, it's the business people, just the business people. This dance ain't for everybody, just the business people. They get up there and they go through this exercise you might have seen where they take all the cards and you swap them around and say, maybe one at a time. Somebody comes up and places one of the cards where they think higher value, lesser value. And then somebody else comes and either can move that card or place another card. And eventually, after you do a couple of rounds of this, you get kind of at least an agreed upon relative value. This is in relative value from lowest to highest. We go, great. Now I'll bring in the technical people and say, now I want you to move them up and down from high effort to low effort. So they might say, all right, these have now been ordered from the highest value. Technical people or engineering people come in and say, all right, this one is probably a medium effort. Checking bounce, that's probably pretty easy. Transfer money, maybe it's around there. Deposit a check, that's kind of getting a little bit more because now we have to scan a check and stuff like that. Draw cash from credit card. All right, we have to interact with credit card companies we don't know, so maybe the APIs are a little difficult. Deposit bottom accounts of cash. All right, that's probably pretty high because now I'm reading cash in and things like that. Set daily limits on withdrawal charges. That one's pretty easy. And so you kind of get this going on. And then what I do is I bring over this little matrix here and place it on top of it. And this is where the weighted shortest job first is you're kind of getting that ROI implied by high value versus, high effort, low effort. So if something is high value and low effort, that is an easy number one to start with, but again, don't let this just say automatically, oh, then that's the one we should do. But then you use your brain and go, okay, but I can't, is check and balance something I want before we withdraw cash? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Maybe you say, all right, that's not as valuable as I think. I'm going to move it. And so you kind of tweak these and you kind of move them into the, places you think that it actually means. Okay, all right, maybe that one goes there and this one goes here. And then you have this matrix. These should be first, these should be second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. And this is kind of putting ROI in one place. I've got value, I've got effort, and you're going to break these down. So I might do this once with these stories, and that gives me which ones I want to talk about. All right, what's the first one I want to talk about? Let's build something I can check my balance. Let's build that first. Let's break that down. So maybe I'll go up here and find that card and break it down. And if there's a bunch of cards for that, I might do the same thing with those cards. So this is, again, an iterative process, like Taylor was asking about. I don't plan to do this only once and it's set in stone. You're constantly reevaluating things because every, whatever your cadence is, with every release, I should be learning new things. I learn, how hard things really are. I learn whether people really actually liked what I did or not. And I can incorporate this. So I like this matrix. I don't like to put the matrix on top. That's kind of I bring that in later. Just let people organically do it. Bring this over, then it kind of forces you to at least put it in some kind of box. And this is where more discussions can happen. They just don't automatically go into one or another. It should be, oh, you know what? This would be the thing. If we did that, I can do a proof of concept where people authenticate. I know who they are. They choose an account. I go and retrieve the information. I show it to them. That would be a really great place to start. Okay, then maybe that's the first thing we do. It really is just a facilitator of that conversation that I think is visual, and it's giving you kind of this relative to each other. Okay, this is more valuable than that, or that is more valuable than this. So that is actually the prioritization I like to do. So I might start here with just some stack ranking, and it depends on how many I have. It depends on if there's a lot of obvious first ones to start with. If there's not, and I'm having some debate, they're really debating, I might then slip into this weighted shortest job first one to kind of get them. The thing about weighted shortest job first is it's all relative to what's on that list. When I add a bunch of new things to that list, I kind of have to do it over again. So there's some other ones in the list I sent you, that article, that talk about some other ways. Yeah, be careful about, some people really want to assign a number, like, oh, this is 3,000 value, and this is 2,000 value, and 1,000 value. Anytime I've done that, I'll just tell you, it has never worked out very well. It has always been something bad. So bad that one time a company was doing this, and I came in and I saw that this was assigned a value of 1022, and this is assigned a value of 1122, and this is assigned a value of 0123. And I'm like, those are some weird numbers. And then I'm like, wait a minute, those are dates. And they're putting in the value. They're putting the value in the date of when they want it delivered. I'm like, oh, no. That's not, that is not how that's done. Value is not the same as release dates. So I've just seen the numbers. They don't mean as much. So anytime you're doing something, anything where you're relatively sizing things at each other, same with estimates. Estimates are the same way. Valuation and estimates are, to me, the exact same kind of methods of approaching them. So, and that's kind of what you see here with the weighted shortest job first. We're, again, relative sizing things against each other. This is one of the harder ones. And then you can say, all right, is it, here's a mid one. Is it harder than that? Yeah, it goes below. If it's easier than that, yeah, it's about the same, stays on the same line. And it gives you that relative sensing there. So before I move on to the last section, questions, comments about weighted shortest job first? All right, let me go back to slides. So let's talk about backlog refinement. So backlog refinement, as defined in the Scrum Guide, if you are a Scrum Guide, person, it is just something that we're spending a certain percentage of time every sprint on looking at the backlog, and the whole team helps with this, on helping, get more detail on each item as it's progressing up the backlog. More detail at the top of the backlog, less detail at the bottom backlog. So, the point is there should be more valuable things at the top, and the things at the bottom have less detail. More detail at the top, less detail at the bottom. We've got something in chat. Is that a question? Okay, there you go. It is a comment, and I always like comments too, because it was a positive comment. I like positive comments. So, but the problem is when you're doing backlog refinement, a lot of times I go into backlog refinement and, people aren't, we're talking about cards that are not going to be delivered for months from now versus, maybe the card that's coming up, we don't have enough detail about. We spend time getting too detailed on things that are further out in the future. And there's a question of how much detail do I need and when do I need to get it? So I found an approach that we use for this that has worked very well for us. That one is, first of all, take your backlog, and you could think of your backlog in 3 different segments. And this actually used to be the way it actually was done in the Scrum Guide. You used to have a release backlog and a product backlog. They took that out, but I kind of like that idea. So, and I actually doubled down on it. So there is part of your backlog, the top of your backlog needs to be ready to play. The guidance used to be in Scrum is that I should have at least 2 sprints worth of stories on my backlog or product backlog items that are refined and mature enough that the team could play them at any moment. They could pull them into a sprint and start working on them right away. That's the level of detail they have. That's what they call ready to play. And then there also are then outside of that, there are other things on my backlog that they are planned to be in a release. We are proposing they be in a release. I don't know if they're going to be released or not. That still depends on release planning and velocity. But these are the things that we have been asked. I would really like this to be in a release. And then there's just the rest of the backlog, which is future stuff that we just have someplace. I got a great idea. I don't need to do it now, but I have to have someplace to do it. Well, you throw that on the backlog. And so what I then is started, and I found this, I can't remember where I originally got this from. It was something I saw at a conference, and they did a backlog maturity model, and they actually called them like newborns and infants and things like that. I didn't like that model, so I just used numbers. Yeah, I'm a metrics guy. So I'm going to work backwards from maturity. So maturity 3, which is our highest level of maturity, should be stuff that's ready to play. What does that mean? Enough detail for the team to have estimated it, prioritized it, and they could start working on this item at any moment in time. If you pulled it into a sprint, they're ready to go. They can plan it out and start working on that. Maturity 2 is enough detail for the team to estimate and prioritize. And why do I need it estimate and prioritize? Well, if I want to put it on a release plan, I need to know where it goes. And if I'm doing the release plan based on like our velocity or anything, any kind of delivery metric like that, I need to have some type of estimate if I'm doing estimates. If you're just doing count of stories, maybe you don't have to worry about this, but you need to have whatever it is that tells you how much of that story you can do or how much that story is going to cost based on your delivery rate. So prioritization and estimated for delivery. And then 1 would just be enough detail for the product owner to prioritize initially. So, in comes the story. I, as a product owner, it needs to have enough information on it for me to look at it, understand it, and go, all right, I don't want to do that yet, or I do want to do that now, and maybe I need to go get it estimated because I want it in the next release. And so these are just tags that we can put on things. And so let me show you what this might look like. And I've got just a simple example board I wanted to show you. So here is what might be a very simple, Kanban style, sprint style board, or whatever you want to do. So, over here, we've got the doing and done and the released and that kind of stuff, but this is more of our backlog length. So I have a new request. So a lot of times I work in places where anybody can throw anything on your backlog. Well, okay, but I, as a product owner, should always have purview of that. Yes, you could suggest something. There could be new requests, but they need to be processed and need to be triaged by me. So what we'll do is we usually have a new request lane where everything new gets thrown in there. And it is a maturity 0. I don't know anything about this yet until a product owner reviews that, and then they'll decide. And you can see I've named these in a specific way that doesn't make them ambiguous. So I ask, and it's basically 3 prioritizations. Does this need to be done right meow? And if it does, like this needs to be done, immediately, well, then it needs to be put in the sprint backlog. Or it needs to be very soon. Okay, it goes into the next 2 sprints. That needs to be, up next. If it doesn't need to be done right now, does it need to be in this release? Yes. Okay, let's put it in here. Again, it doesn't mean it's going to be. That's why it says proposed in there. So people don't think that, oh, this means exactly. No, it's proposed for next release. And then everything else is just in a future release. So instead of saying backlog and release backlog and things like that, which might have some connotation to somebody, I'm trying to really spell it out of what this really means. So what would happen is somebody comes in here with a user story, and I would ask that, and they might say, all right, well, this has to be done right now. This is a bug, or a major, a security breach has happened and we've created something to do that. You need to bring it into the sprint. All right, well then it needs to come to sprint. It goes to the top because if it's the top one, let's not talk about whether I pull things in and out of the sprint. You should, but we're not going to worry about that right now. But then I will have rules on maturity. If you are in the sprint backlog or in the next two sprints, you have to be a maturity of level 3, because we said that maturity level of 3 is there's enough detail to pull you in. So if I started a backlog refinement and this is how my backlog looked right now, the very first thing I would need to groom or refine is this user story, because it does not meet the requirements of a sprint backlog. It is the most important story. It's the highest on the list, and it has not been matured yet. So I would need to sit down in product backlog refinement and talk about this one all the way to maturity 3. I need to get enough detail in it right now so that as soon as we're done talking about it, the team can pull it in play, because it's the most critical one. Now, if we didn't have that story, let's put him back over here. Maybe maybe we just need to brush up on these, depending on how long ago we talked about it and got it maturity 3. If this one is something we talked about 2 months ago, I might still have a quick conversation to make sure nothing's changed. We still feel good about it. Refresh our memory. We're good with that. Then I'd come over here and said, all right, I have a maturity 1 in here. All of these have to be maturity 3 because I can pull them at any time. So then I need to have a discussion about each one of these to get those to maturity 3. Whatever that discussion needs to be, that's what I do. Then once I get those to maturity 3, then everything that in this release, the release backlog, those need to be at least maturity 2, which would have an estimate and a prioritization of a more finite prioritization than the initial one. And so I'd immediately go, all right, well then this card is the card we need to talk about. I need to get it to maturity 2 so that it meets it. And then if I had time, I might go and discuss some of these and get them to a certain maturity, because there's some stories that have no maturity, some, but I don't really need to, because this one really doesn't have one. They should be maybe at least maturity 1, and that's about it. And even then, some of these on the lower, do they need to have it? Maybe, maybe not. And what it gives you is, number one, like even with this, you can see, I can visually see, like if I came in and said, what are we going to talk about today? All I have to do is look for blue and go, oh, nope, all these need to be blue. These are the first ones we're going to talk about. And I also know how much detail do I need to get? Well, on things here, this maturity 1, I don't need to get it to maturity 3. We just need to have a discussion in enough detail for the team feels like they can do a basic estimate. And it just needs to be an initial estimate. We're going to talk about it again. That's the other thing, is I need to talk about cards more than once. It's not like I talk about it and I never talk about it again. And this is also preventing you from doing that. Don't talk about this to the nth level, because I don't need it to be that mature yet. And this allows you during your backlog refinement and backlog grooming to really focus on the things that are most important right now and what level of detail I need to get to them in order to get it into whatever lane it's supposed to be in. So this has really helped us with, when you walk into a backlog refinement meeting, you know exactly what you're talking about, because this is, on every board, and anybody can look at it and go, all right, I can tell you, I know the first one we're going to talk about is probably that maturity 1 in the next 2 sprints, because it doesn't meet the maturity needs that we have for that lane definition. So let me stop there. Questions, comments, concerns about backlog maturity? All right. Oh, Taylor's back. What do you want to ask Taylor? No worries.
So I'm just curious, how would that maturity 1 end up in the next 2 sprints then, if whoever's owning it is operating and not?
Because I'm a product owner, and somebody who pays my paycheck came in and said, this is the next thing you have to do in the next release. So even if I got this story and it came into my new request, and it's maybe, because we usually do groomings like Tuesdays and Thursdays. Those are usually good days to do, and we'll put a couple hours on each one to do that. But if this story comes in on Monday and I open it up and look at it, and I call the stakeholder, and he's like, this absolutely has to be done it doesn't have to be done this sprint, but it has to be the next one. So I move it into here. I know I got to groom that. And if it got moved into here, I need to actually stop everybody and say, we have to groom this now. We can't wait to a normal grooming. We have to groom this now.
Okay.
And so I've also seen people make the maturity the lanes, and I don't like that. And the reason is that, if I had the maturity in lanes, this guy would still be back here because he's maturity 0, but that doesn't reflect his priority. So I prefer if you're doing, and I'm a Kanban guy, so everything moves from left to right.
Mhm.
Right is money, right is done. And so I like this model because it is priority should be moving left to right as well. And I like this model and then using tags for maturity rather than using lanes for maturity. Now, I will tell you, I have a couple of teams who said, we think you're stupid. We're going to do it this way. And nobody died and nothing caught on fire. They still have maturity and they have prioritization. They just switched it where they are using tags for priority, like high, medium, and low, and then they're using lanes for maturity. I just personally don't like that because I'm a Kanban guy and I don't like cards that move back and forth. I like cards flowing across. So this is the way I prefer. But as long as the teams have both those things represented and they and the client, it's galactically obvious to both of them, then I don't care.
Cool. Thank you.
All right, absolutely. All right, let's jump back in a little bit more slides. So we just did that demo. So here's, so we're basically done and I can do my wrap up and then I'll ask this question. So I just wanted to kind of, bring these again. There is tons of other stuff that comes into building a great backlog. Don't get me wrong. But again, I wanted to focus on the ones that I think really contribute to, are you getting the return on investment you need out of your backlog? And these three things I have found just doing this for 30 years are the things that affect it the most. How I break down my work is probably the most important. If I don't do that wrong, if I don't do that well, prioritization and refinement doesn't matter because my story is too big, it's too clumsy, it's clunky. So I really focus on that. Then once we do that, then these different prioritization techniques. And again, I have not found one that just fits every situation. Knowing a little bit of all of them, experimenting with them, knowing when to pull one. There will be times when I'm in one and I can see the team struggling. I'll go, all right, let's shift. Let's do a different one. Depending on what we're doing, where we're at. And so I would suggest, going and reading that article, having a couple of those in your toolbox and just experimenting with them, even just sometimes just switch them up just to try them out. And then, using them intelligently when it makes sense. And then the backlog refinement, just, also make sure you are giving enough time to backlog refinement. That is probably that and retros are two of the least, paid attention to ceremonies of Scrum. Backlog refinement is supposed to be, I don't know if it's in the backlog, if it's still in there, but it used to be 10% of the sprint should be, the team should be spending time on backlog refinement. And if you think about a 2-week sprint, that's almost 2 days of the whole team's time doing this. And I just have seen people try to get out of backlog refinement as fast as possible. We got it figured out. Let's move. And that's what causes downstream problems. You will see cards grow in size. Something you thought was a 2. Once you get into the sprint, you find all this unknown stuff. It's now a 5. And that means blown out sprints. Or if you get into like a sprint planning and suddenly you're talking about a whole bunch of level of detail and the stories get bigger, then you're not grooming well enough because sprint planning shouldn't be grooming. You should know the story and you should be able to plan it by the time it gets there. And that's where the maturity models come in and help you with spending the time wisely during grooming. So with that, I'm officially done, but I'm going to stay around for some questions for the next 10 minutes. But if you want to contact me, there's my email. Connect with me on LinkedIn if we're not already connected. That's another great place to talk to me. There's my Twitter. I don't use it a lot, I'll admit. But I do put stuff on there. If you are interested in the O'Reilly stuff I mentioned about all my videos on there, O'Reilly.TommyNorman.com will take you to a search page that shows you all of the ones on there. Everything you saw here, we use at Acklen. And Acklen is the culmination of all my 30 years of doing things. I got to come to Acklen and my boss, the CEO of our company, Colin Conley, had said, build it the way you would do it. And so this is the culmination of all the things of this is how I would, I do it. And we've been very successful with that. We have very happy clients. We have very happy teams. And this works well for us. Will it work well for you? Maybe, maybe not, but it's at least some good place to start. Also, if you like this webinar, we are doing one a quarter. Our next one's going to be about distributed teams. I just got back from Keep Austin Agile conference down there, and I did a one on remote teams. And it's not like a put your camera on and everybody be in Slack. It's not that. It's about remote culture because Acklen is 100% remote. Tatiana, I think we've been together in the same room maybe twice. Yeah. And a lot of my teams are that way. We were born remote. We've been remote from the start. It's built into our culture. And so I talk about how you build a remote culture versus just, all the different little tactic stuff. That will be coming up in end of January, right? I think that's when it is.
Yes.
Look for that. But if you go to webinars.acklenavenue.com, that is always the sign up page for whatever the next Acklen webinar is. So let me stop talking about all of that stuff and open it back up for questions, comments, anything anybody wants to share or ask. And if you can't think of it now and you think of it later, hit me on LinkedIn or email me. I'll be glad to talk to you about it then as well. I'd love to know what you guys are using. Is there anything I showed you that you hadn't used or something that you think is really good that I didn't show? It's the Taylor show.
I don't mean to be like that, but if no one else is, well, I run a really small team, so we move a little slower than I would say 2 week sprints by. We just have one developer, one designer, and me.
Okay.
But we use a lot of Kanban methods. I've never really seen it that way as far as like those types of lanes, which are really interesting. We do planning poker typically for prioritization planning. Sure. But I like the second kind of step as far as like doing the value versus like time spent as well. I thought that was super interesting.
And some of my teams still do, some of them do t-shirt sizing and some of them do Fibonacci, story point sizing. That is not something we dictate. It's just as long as it makes sense to you and the team. Let me show something else real quick. So if you think that Kanban board was interesting, so that is just a template I wanted to show you because I didn't want to show you one, but let me go to, so this is an example of an actual board we use. So this always, flips some people out if they've never really seen, this kind of in-depth Kanban board. So you can see here where they were doing low priority, medium priority, high priority, but they were doing what I said, groomed, to be groomed, ready for building UI, I think this kind of stuff. But what they were doing is saying, all right, if anything's high priority, it's the first thing that has to be groomed. So they were kind of doing that, but they did something a little bit different. Then you get to on deck, because we are not Scrum, we don't have a sprint. So that is just a queue that has to be filled in all the time. And there has to be at least 4 in there. And then you get into, so our planning is just the first lane. We don't plan every 2 weeks. We plan as soon as a card is pulled in. And then everything. So now, see, everything. This is a very in-depth Kanban board. Every time we're doing something and every time something is waiting. So you see developing, ready for code review, code reviewing, ready for UI review. So I have these wait lanes as well. All the way until we get it into testing, because I don't usually own production because we're a vendor. That's kind of where our whip ends. And then it's kind of like, all right, it's ready for you. And then we deploy to production, there is UAT and things like that. And then there's the done. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, this is when you look at it zoomed out, it's a very big Kanban board, but I know where everything is at any given time. I also get some really great statistics from this on cycle time, and in that cycle time, how much is that actual work time versus wait time? So I just want that board I showed you was a simplified version just to show the product backlog stuff. We are never simply to do, doing, and done.
Cool.
All right. Any other questions? Fred jumped off, and we'll send out recordings. Absolutely. A recording will be up there. All right. If there are no other questions, thank you guys for spending a Friday lunch with me. And I hope you have a great weekend, and see you at the next webinar. And if you need to ask any questions, you can send those to me on LinkedIn. Keith, you got one before we leave?
Thanks, Tommy.
Right.
A LinkedIn?
Yeah. Or I mean, I didn't know if you had unmuted because you had a question before we left.
No, I just decided to say goodbye. I just want to say thanks.
Oh, thank you, Keith. Thanks for coming. All right. See you, everybody.
Thank
you so much.